Thank you, Excellencies. The leaders will now take questions. We'll begin with the first question from the Malaysian media. I'd like to call upon Malaysia's TV3 to have the first question. Go ahead. Can we have the mic? Yeah.
Yes. Good afternoon and selamat datang to Mr. President.
Thank you.
I am Azura from TV3 Malaysia. I have a question on the issue of proliferation security initiative. Datuk Seri, this is something new for Malaysia. Are we going to be the 103rd member for PSI? And what is the SOP like? And do we have the expertise? And for Mr. President, is the US going to assist us in capacity building and other requirements? Thank you.
Well, this PSI is actually not new in substance because we've been working very closely with the United States and whenever there is a request for us to do some interdiction, we've never failed to respond. What we're doing today is to formalize it so that there will be a formal relationship. And that relationship will just continue what we have done. And it also reflects a strong will and desire on Malaysia's side to cooperate not only with the United States, but the international community to stop the proliferation, sorry.
That's a hard one.
I know.
I always screw it up.
For the spread, rather, of parts for nuclear weapons and weapons of mass destruction. I'll get it right, don't worry.
Well, as the Prime Minister said, this is an area where we've already developed strong partnership, and I want to commend Prime Minister Najib and his national security team, and law enforcement intelligence teams. I think it's fair to say that when both of us came into office, this wasn't at the top of the priority list, and what we were seeing, though, was that this region was a potential area where traffickers in parts and systems that could lead to nuclear proliferation or weapons of mass destruction could operate. So in our conversations and our team's consultations, we began to tighten the links and bonds between us in terms of sharing information, identifying threats, and working more closely and cooperatively together. And we've done that. What the PSI does, as the Prime Minister says, is formalize it. It puts a framework around it. It involves capacity building, but it's not just a one-way street. Obviously, we have been working on these issues for a long time. I consider the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction as one of the greatest threats to U.S. security as well as international peace. So we have developed a lot of capacities in this area, but this is a partnership. And what we seek to do is to find ways in which the strengths and the information that each side has can be enhanced and combined and pooled so that we don't have the possibility of loose nuclear materials or certain component parts that are being shipped or falling into the wrong hands. And we very much appreciate the cooperation that's already there, but I think what the PSI signifies is that we can do even better in the future.
Next question comes from Chad of NBC News.
Thank you, Mr. President. And Mr. Prime Minister, Selamat Tengah Hari.
There you go.
Is that right?
Yeah, good job.
Okay.
That's right.
Mr. President, on the situation in Ukraine and the Russian sanctions that I know the United States and others are going to be announcing on Monday, I guess my question is, why wait on sectoral sanctions as far as the United States is concerned? Why not do that on your own now and sooner rather than wait for the Europeans to get on board on this? Because aren't you concerned that Putin is essentially using the European angst over tougher sanctions as a way to slow walk things and buy more time and space for himself? Quickly on a second topic, Mr. President, there's a controversy surrounding some horrendous racially charged comments that an owner of the LA Clippers made. I was wondering if you care to comment on that. And to the Prime Minister, the TPP, I know you talked about it, it's been generating some protests here in your country, including another one today. Chief concern being some worries of higher costs of medical supplies in particular. Was wondering if you could comment on those protests and the concern that somehow you're being bullied into the TPP by the United States. Do you feel that way on that front? Thank you.
Okay. First on Ukraine. In consultation with our European partners, we've determined that because Russia has failed to follow through on its side of the accord that had been hammered out in Geneva, it was important for us to take further steps, sending a message to Russia that the kind of destabilizing activities that are taking place in the east and the south of Ukraine have to stop. There was a glimmer of hope after the Geneva Accords that Ukraine would follow through on its commitments to enter into a dialogue around constitutional reforms, that it would do everything it needed to do to disarm irregular forces and militias, and it would offer amnesty to those who willingly laid down arms and pulled out of the buildings. They've been doing that. Russia has not lifted a finger to help. In fact, there's strong evidence that they've been encouraging the kinds of activities that have been taking place in eastern and southern Ukraine. And so, collectively, us and the Europeans have said that so long as Russia continues down the path of provocation rather than trying to resolve this issue peacefully and de-escalating, there are going to be consequences, and those consequences will continue to grow. Now, the notion that for us to go forward with sectoral sanctions on our own without the Europeans would be the most effective deterrent to Mr. Putin, I think is factually wrong. We're going to be in a stronger position to deter Mr. Putin when he sees that the world is unified and the United States and Europe is unified, rather than this is just a U.S.-Russian conflict. And in fact, you notice that oftentimes they're really interested in portraying this through this old Cold War prism, when in fact that's not what the issue is here. The issue is respecting basic international norms of sovereignty and territorial integrity. The issue is, can the Ukrainians make their own decisions about how they govern themselves and who they have international relations with? That's our only interest in this whole process. And so it's important for us to make sure that we are part of an international coalition sending that message, and that Russia is isolated in its actions, rather than falling into the trap of interpreting this as the United States is trying to pull Ukraine out of Russia's orbit circa 1950, because that's not what this is about. And the Europeans have a larger stake in this than anyone. Now, as I said, I think at the last press conference, there are going to be differences even within Europe, in part because of the nature of the economic relationships that they've got. And we've got to work through those in a systematic way. If, in fact, we need to move forward with sectoral sanctions, then it's going to be important that we know exactly what we're prepared to do and sustain over the long haul. Our European partners know what they're willing and able to do as well, and the more we are unified, the more effective it's going to be. If we, for example, say we're not going to allow certain arms sales to Russia, just take an example, but every European defense contractor backfills what we do, then it's not very effective. It's going to be more effective if everybody signs on and everybody's committed. No, I didn't say, I didn't say only, never, when. I said this is our strategy. And I want to emphasize every time I address this question, there is a diplomatic path to resolving this issue. The Geneva statement pointed towards how we could resolve this statement. What it asks of the Russians is hardly onerous. Make a public statement that those militias need to lay down their arms and exit those buildings. Participate with international observers and monitors rather than stand by while they're being bullied and in some cases detained by these thugs. Negotiate with the Ukrainian government and engage in some confidence building measures. These aren't heavy lifts if the Russians are sincere in wanting to resolve this problem. So far we haven't seen that, but we're going to keep on raising the consequences of Russia rejecting that path towards diplomacy. With respect to the statements by the owner of the Los Angeles Clippers, for our Malaysian audience, this is a sports team, basketball team in the United States. The owner is reported to have said some incredibly offensive racist statements that were published. I don't think I have to interpret those statements for you. They kind of speak for themselves. You know, when people, when ignorant folks want to advertise their ignorance, you don't really have to do anything. You just let them talk, and that's what happened here. You know, I have confidence that the NBA Commissioner, Adam Silver, a good man, will address this. Obviously, the NBA is a league that is beloved by fans all across the country. It's got an awful lot of African-American players. It's steeped in African-American culture. And I suspect that the NBA is going to be deeply concerned in resolving this. I will make just one larger comment about this. You know, the United States continues to wrestle with a legacy of race and slavery and segregation. That's still there. The vestiges of discrimination. We've made enormous strides, but you know, you're going to continue to see this percolate up every so often. And I think that we just have to be clear and steady in denouncing it, teaching our children differently, but also remaining hopeful that part of why some statements like this stand out so much is because there has been this shift in how we view ourselves. And like Malaysia, you know, we constantly have to be on guard against racial attitudes that divide us rather than embracing our diversity as a strength. And I know that the people of Malaysia are committed to you know, wrestling with those issues as well. We have to make sure that we stay on top of it. And we will. Even though it wasn't directed to me, I'm going to say one thing about TPP, this notion somehow that some protests here might indicate the U.S. bullying. Keep in mind, I got protests back home from my own party about TPP. So there's never been a trade deal in which somebody is not going to, at some point, object because they're fearful of the future or they're invested in the status quo. And I think it's just very important for everybody to wait and see what exactly is the agreement that has been negotiated before folks jump to conclusions. You take an issue like drugs, for example. The United States does extraordinary work in research and development and providing medical breakthroughs that save a lot of lives around the world. Those companies that make those investments in that research oftentimes want a return. And so there are all kinds of issues around intellectual property and patents and so forth. At the same time, I think we would all agree that if there's a medicine that can save a lot of lives, then we got to find a way to make sure that it's available to folks who simply can't afford it as part of our common humanity. And both those values are reflected in the conversations and negotiations that are taking place around TPP. So the assumption somehow that right off the bat, that's not something we're paying attention to. That reflects lack of knowledge of what is going on in the negotiations. So but my point is, you shouldn't be surprised if there are going to be objections, protests, rumors, conspiracy theories, political aggravation around a trade deal. You've been around long enough, Chuck. That's true in Malaysia. It's true in Tokyo. It's true in Seoul. It's true in the United States of America. And it's true in the Democratic Party. So I continue to strongly believe, however, that this is going to be the right thing to do, creating jobs, creating businesses, expanding opportunity for the United States, and it's going to be good for countries like Malaysia that have been growing rapidly but are interested in making that next leap to the higher value aspects of the supply chain that can really boost income growth and development.
I'd just like to echo what President Obama said. Emphatically, in no uncertain terms, we went to the TPP on our own accord. We were not bullied into it, and I can attest to our commitment towards free trade as the principle and philosophy, because we have entered into 13 separate FTA agreements with other countries. So Malaysia is a great believer in free trade, but we also understand that the benefits of free trade, like boosting trade, creating wealth, jobs, those are the good things. But there will be some losers in the process. You know, there'll be winners and losers. But overall, the benefit, I think, is important for us to show to the people in Malaysia that the benefits far outweigh the disadvantages of a free trade agreement. And this is what, in the final analysis, what we have to do, because the underpinning to a free trade agreement would be acceptance by the people. And we have committed to that process. We'll engage with the public, and we'll also present it to Parliament. So we are working out around the sensitivities and challenges, which I alluded to in my discussions with President Obama. He fully understands our domestic sensitivities, and we will sit down and try to iron this out with the intention of trying to work out a deal in the near future.